Who had an awesome day yesterday at the Future Fabrics Expo? Awesome. Who wants to make a little noise so that anyone else here will come over and start listening? Go, woo! Here they come. Here they come. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, we're really excited to kick the day off with you today. We have some amazing innovators and brand representatives on the stage, and we're going to dive into reimagining materials and manufacturing. So we not only are going to talk about the material part of innovation, but also the processes and what we're doing there. So it's going to be quite exciting. So to kick off, I'm just going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves. So they can tell you a little bit about what they're doing in their technology, and then I'll set the context a little bit and we'll dive in. And we will leave questions at the end, so for the last 15 minutes or so you can get ready, start preparing some. Let's start with you, Maria.
All right, great. So really happy to be here. We're having a great time at this fair. And my name's Maria. I'm the CEO of Simplyfiber, and at Simplyfiber what we do is we make plant fibers, and we take plant fibers and mold them into 3D shapes. So we're kind of using plant and natural materials in much the same way as plastic has been used. And the purpose for this is to simplify the manufacturing for soft goods and reduce the amount of industrial steps needed so that we can reduce the energy needed. It's a more direct system, and it lowers the cost of these materials in relation to plastic so they can actually be competitive in the market.
Great. And you are wearing?
Yeah, and I'm wearing some of our shoes. So yeah, and we've got lots of shoes at the stand, so please come check them out.
Okay. Excellent. Over to you, Mira.
Hey everyone, I'm Mira, and I'm the founder of Biophilica. So we have created a new material called Treekind. It's a coated textile that looks a lot like leather. I'm wearing a little bit of that right here, so you can see it. Come to our stand as well and check it out more. So what's different about our material is that it's 100% bio-based. There's no plastic in our material. It's also a compostable material. We have published that report on our website. We are 100% bio-based certified by the USDA. And in addition to our material Treekind, we've also developed a 100% bio-based adhesive because we found that that area was completely lacking, and we needed a 100% bio-based adhesive for Treekind. So we had to develop it ourselves. Same thing for the foam that we're currently started developing as well. That is also by necessity because we want 100%. And we want things to be both recyclable and compostable given how the whole world situation looks.
Yeah.
Thank you, great to be here.
Yeah, amazing. Those are such big pain points, the coating and finishing and the foam, so really great. Yeah. Victoria?
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria. I'm one of the co-founders of Nanoloom, and we make new fibers and textiles from graphene nanomaterials. So they were originally developed for use in people, things like nerve regeneration and wound healing. So they're materials that were entirely designed to safely biodegrade in the human body and be non-toxic. They've already gone to patients for wound healing and are going towards preclinical stage for nerve regeneration. And we also, similar to everyone else on this panel, we wanted to apply this technology to a place where it could also have an environmental benefit. So the first thing that we're looking at is we've developed a replacement from these materials for elastane or spandex. It's super high performing. It can be inherently hydrophobic without additives, and it's also recyclable as well as the biodegradation piece. So at the moment, we're at the Mills Fabrica. We've also got a stand here, so you can come and feel some of it. And yeah, hope to meet some of you later.
Great. Thanks, Victoria.
Hi. Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
It's strange, isn't it? Can't hear ourselves.
Lovely. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here as well. My name is Dali Alnaeb. I am a computational designer at Vivobarefoot. which is a footwear brand that focuses on minimalist bare footwear. I'm representing Vivobiome, which is the innovation department at Vivo, where we are on a mission to reimagine the way footwear is made, rather than make a new product per se, but kind of like reimagine the system using 3D printing. But today I will be focusing specifically on our collaboration with Balena, which is a company, a material science company, that developed a very cool biomaterial, and we had this lovely collaboration where we actually 3D printed the first fully bespoke, fully 3D printed compostable shoe. So at least at the time, I think that should be still valid. But yeah, so very excited to share more about that project as we go along.
Which you are wearing.
Which I'm wearing. So unfortunately, I'm not wearing the biodegradable one, but it is here in the stand, so you guys should go and have a feel. But it is the same shape and morphology.
Great. Yeah, they do have a stand here too, Balena. Great. And quickly, I'm Christine Goulay. I'm the founder and CEO of a consultancy called Sustainabelle Advisory Services, and I'm focused on sustainable fashion innovation. I worked previously at the Caring Group for a number of years and also at Pangaea. So I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of innovators and a lot of investors and brands on these topics, and I'm quite passionate about it. And actually, some of you might have heard yesterday or seen, but there's a report that I just published yesterday on Next Gen to This Gen, scaling material innovations in the fashion sector. And so for this report, we had a survey of investors, innovators, brands, suppliers, and support organizations like the Sustainable Angle or the Mills Fabrica. We had almost 160 respondents, and then I did 62 expert interviews of these same stakeholder groups. So this report kind of consolidates all the feedback from these different groups, trying to understand what are the challenges, and are the challenges different for one type of innovator than another, or for investor versus brand? What are the resources that have been helpful for them? What are the ways that they're able to adopt more easily? So I'm also going to be drawing out through this session some of the findings from that report when relevant. Okay, so we're going to dive in, and we're going to start on the material side and the question of performance. So I think we know that three of the big challenges: price, performance, and implementation. And this came out quite heavily in the report, where almost everybody said price was the number one hurdle. Not a big surprise, but brands actually said performance. So meeting the brand's performance requirements was the main hurdle and challenge in adoption. And it seemed like, from talking to people, that performance was sort of this entry ticket to enable everything else. So you need to show that you're going to be able to achieve the right performance, the standards that have been set by your partners, to get, the door open. So I wanted to kind of start with that question and see if that resonates with you guys, and what is it that you need to show to de-risk the technology and allow brands and investors to believe that this will work?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the performance aspect has been a long journey, but it was always our goal for the materials to work as well as conventional materials, if not better. And so what we do is we always ask the partners we're talking to, what are your material requirements? We have different fields that we work in as well, and we try to meet them for every field, and we've so far been successful. Now we're getting into wear tests and things like that. And for me, I think it's just, it's kind of a no-brainer, because these performance requirements are set up so that you can make good products, and so that the consumer will be satisfied. They won't have a thing that falls off their foot or it doesn't work. So we pay attention to that, and I think that's really important for materials companies to listen to all of that, because people are just trying to help us make a good product, and people want good products from us. So for us, it's it's an absolute must.
Yeah, great. Okay. And I'll go to Victoria for a minute. But do you find the same thing, Victoria, that you have to show right away that you're meeting the standards, or do you feel like there's a little bit of leeway where you get to a certain level and they say, okay, we can see that this will work, and they,
I think for us it's a bit different because we use graphene. So just for context, I won't go into too much detail, but if you had a sheet of graphene that was the thickness of cling film, you would need an elephant to break it. So for us, the questions more came around feasibility, like are you sure you can make this into a textile? And then we did that. And then the next phase is sort of the other piece that you were talking about, which is it going to be able to fit into our existing processes? And that's a bit harder because you're working with something completely new, and it's almost like the old processes sort of can even dampen what your technology is capable of. So I think for us, we've had a bit more leeway when it comes to the performance question, but that expectation is definitely still there.
So so for you, having to adapt your material to the traditional supply chain, so this implementation and process part actually could reduce some of the performance of the material.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the fibers we made broke the looms. So we've basically made we've adjusted it to fit into the way that for now traditional elastane, for example, is used, which is a bit of a shame because it could be so much more. So.
Yeah. That's interesting. What about you, Dali? What's your perspective when you're working with innovators?
Yeah, so this one is actually quite a big one, performance, because in footwear, as you know, like the product itself is meant to withstand a person's weight, so it's supposed to behave highly in compression, but also the foot, because it moves so in such a complex way, the product should also have like some tensile strength as well. So we're actually very, very quite happy with what we have produced with Balena, because for it to be an actually biodegradable material, and the fact that it can sit on foot and perform with walking and all this is quite a feat in and of itself, no pun intended. but actually, but of course, at this stage, it is still a prototype, and we're hoping with with more time invested and more research that we might start wear testing it in the real world with consumers within 18 months. But I think, of course, then when you look at performance from an end-of-life perspective, that's where the material really shines. So it makes up for, mechanical, because you're competing with injection molding and rubber, and obviously we all know, like, it's something that is it's a tough, stiff competition. But yes, so the end-of-life aspect is obviously quite fascinating in this, and I'll probably touch more on it.
For sure. And do you ever, one thing that's come up in the study too is the performance standards are so high already. Like, do we really need, I don't know how many belly flexes it is for an upper, but 300,000, or is that not really fit for purpose? And do we have to look at these again in terms of whether they're the right markers that we should be judging materials against, or whether they've been over-engineered? I don't know if any of you guys have any thoughts on that comment.
I mean, if I can jump
Yes,
in, yeah. I do think they have been over-engineered, specifically when you see how much goes into a traditional shoe today. Something upwards of 60 materials can go into a single shoe, and layer upon layer of complexity and comfort and cushioning and internal padding and all this. So, like, there definitely is a very large element of over-engineering. But I think what is fascinating about the material that that we've done with Balena is actually they've used quite nifty techniques to work around mechanical strength. So, like, for instance, the way you print in 3D printing, the layer, the orientation of the print can vary the mechanical properties of the product at the end.
Okay.
The post-processing, the print speed, the nozzle time. So there's a lot of like cool techniques you can use to alleviate some of the mechanical attributes. So I think, and obviously doing it with a single material is then it's a much more sustainable way of doing it.
Yeah, so again, kind of echoing what Victoria was saying, there is this symbiosis between the material and the implementation and process. And in some respects, in trying to get the highest material and a drop-in, you might actually be limiting one, in that they could be like, to get the best material, you need a different process. So it's kind of interesting to see that from both of you.
100%.
If I can add to that as well. Sorry also everyone for the coughing. As you can tell, I'm getting over a cold, so that's why a little more might be coming. Apologies in advance. I do think that the example that you brought up, for example, the 300,000 flex cycles, I do think these are important for certain types of shoes. If you consider that an active person or a child might get up to 10,000 steps in a day. So it's quite easy to figure out then how long that lasts. At the same time, one thing that we talk a lot about with brands is to look at what can be replaced now before it has to be further developed to meet more advanced requirements, because that is really the key that that unlocks obviously sales revenue and also further investment for innovators to be working with brands with the material as it is currently. And I think that's just about finding the right fit.
Yeah.
And then you can build on that and build on that and build on that. I think it becomes a little problematic when you try and go for quite advanced, for example, footwear from the start, because a shoe is a complex, a sneaker, for example, is a complex little thing. A lot of engineering goes into it. So that is also our key focus at the moment, and just looking like, okay, but what are the things you can do right now?
Right. So more designing into the current limitations
Yeah.
of the performance of the material, rather than taking the material and trying to drop it into an existing product, which I think a lot of brands do. And it's kind of like, well, if this material cracks in the piping, don't use it in the piping. And there you go. It doesn't have to be a next gen solution across the entire product at the end.
Yeah, and what are other biomaterials that you can use for those other areas, so you can combine something that it still meets all the sustainability criteria. It's like, use the materials what they're good for, and like maybe mix and match a little bit.
Yeah, I love that.
Example.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that we heard yesterday, and I've been hearing this a lot, and it really makes me concerned, I have to say, is that brands are now expecting that innovators have a higher level of performance than traditional materials in order to justify the premium that they're going to pass right on to their consumer. I don't know if you guys have faced this issue.
I think you have to define performance a little bit differently with some of the new materials, because all of our performance metrics and all of the comparison systems that have been created, a lot of them were generated for the plastics industry and polyester and like conventional materials. So they're looking at different things. They're looking at what it performs in those materials. And with natural materials, with these new materials that we have here today, there are other criteria that aren't even taken into consideration. Like, some of them are hard to measure. Some of them are like the feeling on the skin. Some of them are, what happens after the end of the life. These should be just as important performance metrics. And when you take those into account, actually these materials will perform better, So they give another dimension, but it's not a dimension that people have really been looking at.
Right, or ones that might not be as easy to quantify when it comes to the aesthetics, but equally as important. So you have to kind of move that rubric in to make sure that these things are taken into account and have the same importance as the numbers of belly flexes you're able to achieve.
Because otherwise you get into a place where we got into with the Higgs index, which was set up for polyester, and then of course it was biased towards polyester and recycled polyester when it really shouldn't have been.
Yeah, good point. Does anyone else want to comment on this one?
I'll
Victoria?
comment. So I think, when we go into it, because we say graphene nanomaterials, people assume we're expensive. But my view is that textiles is still currently completely a commodities-based business. Like, we have to be able to cost compete. Unfortunately, that's the way the industry is at the moment. And as much as people have cared about performance, they still, like you said, like at the start, the number one thing is still price. So I think that's sort of been one of the things that we've worked really hard to get our costs down and that kind of thing. And then that, I guess that also gives the hope that we can have more sustainable materials in more basic clothing, as opposed to just being like, a performance wear material.
And maybe we can turn a little more now to the implementation or process manufacturing part of the equation. So how does with each of you, I know that there's the drop-in solution, and then there's sort of the systems overhaul disruptive route. How are you guys approaching this question? Are you going for I'm drop-in? Are you going for no? I'm really trying to change the way we're doing things, and how does that also impact cost, scalability? What's your vision of scaling in terms of implementation? Do you want to go first, Mira?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We're mainly focused on we're as close as we can get to a drop-in solution because that just speeds up scaling it, basically.
Yeah.
You could scale it in multiple areas at the same time. That said, we are aware that we might need to modify certain processes. So we have ranked our different processes so that the ones that we're open to changing are easier and less costly, and that could potentially also be something that we work together on with a manufacturer. Because if you need to change a like £4 million system, that's going to be a bigger hurdle, obviously.
Right.
So that's our focus. And I just wanted to also talk briefly about your previous question as well. I think one of the key things in working together with brands is that people are really interested in the cost and it being on the same level as current options. The thing is that the current options, so I think we're all talking a lot about plastic or petrochemical raw materials. They have been scaled and optimized for 100 years.
And subsidized.
And subsidized, exactly. And there's so much research has gone into it.
Yeah.
And so the expectation that in a couple of years something will be at the same scaled and like as an optimized scaled level is just not realistic. And the reason why plastic is so optimized and scaled is because of all that investment. So if we, as a collective want to change, then you have to like really put huge cash injections into that direction. Like people have to just really show it.
Right.
And I think that's just really key. I would love to compare, some of our materials with like Bakelite. It's just that it's not apples to apples.
No, it isn't. And even if you think about Lycra development within DuPont, that took 30 years.
Yeah.
And also in the report, we have kind of the timelines for many different types of material developments and how long they took. And it's usually 30 years, for it to really get to a place of commercialization. And now it's sort of this instant gratification, like, it's been 2 years. Where is it? It's kind of crazy.
And that's also a really big question because saying it's going to take 10 years or maybe 30 years, that's just not going to, I don't know many investors that would go for that.
Right.
And so that's why I think we need to look at the funding models as well to facilitate this massive shift that we all need.
Right, yeah. Let's get to funding in a minute. I want to turn also maybe Dali, please.
Yeah, actually, there's something. So there's a two-part answer. I guess also a part about your previous question with regarding to performance versus price.
Yep.
Again, like since I think Vivobiome, actually we've implemented somewhat of an interesting approach to this to ensure that customers understand. Obviously, this currently applies, let's say, to the non-biodegradable shoe, but I would see the same process happening when we start wear testing this version with Belena soon. But basically, the way we've done it is we appreciate that this is new tech and a new manufacturing process and everything, and we try to make sure that the consumers understand that this is not battle ready yet. So the way we kind of try to sell this is basically something we call a pioneer program, which essentially you book a spot on a program rather than just buy the product itself, and you get 2 to 3 pairs as a result. So what this does is that it lets them wear the shoe, dance, flow, run, do their thing, and the feedback is, which is the most critical part, then unlocks the next pair and the one after that, and this way, like, everybody's on the same page with, okay, we are here together to kind of like discover how to go forward with this very wasteful process of making shoes and try to maybe reimagine something anew. And the
That's
second,
really great, because often the feedback loop is not there at all.
exactly,
So many startups send a sample and they're like, did the brand like it? Did they not like it? Did the, getting
Precisely.
that response is hard. Yeah.
so you're purchasing a part in the program rather than just
Yeah.
a
Nice.
product. And I think that actually has given us a lot of like critical feedback to evolve. And I see the same thing happening hopefully with Belena within the next year and a half. But also like on the subject of like drop-in versus reimagining a system, I think because we are using 3D printing, and I think it's so refreshing to see a manufacturing process that uses a single material. Like it's quite a leap forward in my opinion to make performative products with one single material. And of course, needless to say, the massive supply chain then gets reduced, and the aim actually for us is to onshore the entire process also within the next 12 to 18 months. So we aim to have like a factory cell in Bristol, which is Vivo's nature home, and basically just onshore the entire production of this one material. And so I think because we are using a completely different manufacturing process, I would see it as you have to probably reimagine the entire system.
Many benefits.
Yeah.
I actually also have an opinion on the drop-in versus the revolutionary change. So, as you know, because we worked together back in 2008, I spent quite a few years working as a sustainable designer, and I was working with drop-in solutions. And like I saw my company that I was working for, 2 of them like go under. I saw. I've now been seeing other brands slowing down, and it's always because when you use a more expensive material as a drop-in solution in a broken system, it's always going to compete at a disadvantage because there are other materials that are less expensive and easier to use, and that's when I kind of realized that to give an advantage to these materials that they should have, we needed to make a new system. And the whole point of what we're doing is to enable these raw materials to compete at a cost level, because there's a system that's actually built for them that will be cheaper and easier and more automated to scale. So I really do think that the existing materials exist in the market, and they will always win against new drop-in solutions unless we really change the system in favor of these new materials, all of these great ideas that are coming onto the market.
And what would you suggest in terms of changing the system in favor? What are some mechanisms?
Yeah, so instead of replacing one part of the supply chain, what we're doing is replacing a big chunk of the supply chain. And we're cutting out industrial processes, so we can start with like fibers at the beginning of the supply chain. We don't have to spin them, we don't have to weave or knit them. We're going straight from fibers to shape and eliminating all of that inefficiency and waste, and providing them in a system that can be more automated. So we don't have to have as much sewing time by hand. So, what we want is to really modernize soft goods production, because nobody else makes any other products this way. It's just fashion. We've got this weird system.
Very fragmented, and obviously there hasn't been much investment. I'm sure you've probably seen the pictures of a factory from 100 years ago that looks exactly like a factory from today. So it is interesting to see. I think a lot of that is due to the outsourcing and the fact that brands don't actually have ownership over a lot of their supply chain. But it is quite a dilemma that people are saying we want drop-in, and yet by the revolutionizing these systems, you could actually do something that could be performing better, could be better for the environment, could be localized. So a lot of change on the way, I'm sure. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions in just a minute. I just want to have one more question, sort of more about the investment part of things and how you feel that the landscape in terms of investment maybe has changed recently. Are you getting questions specifically around what we're talking about today, like the performance of the material, or are the standards getting higher from investors? What are you seeing on that side?
Yeah.
You go? I see you
The
nodding.
standards
Yeah.
are really getting higher,
Yeah.
like even in the last 3 years since we've been in business. And, what we're seeing is that VCs and investors, they've been burned a little bit by the first version of the new gen fabrics because, those people were change makers. They didn't have any kind of plan to follow, and there were a lot of mistakes that were made. There were a lot of inefficiencies. A lot of money was spent, and so people are kind of like, we don't want to do that again. But so they're looking with a lot more scrutiny at the new businesses, which I guess in a way is healthy because we want our business to run as well as it can. There's a little bit less patience in terms of development time, I would say. But we ourselves want to move quickly, so I guess that's all right. I guess, there's a really fine line between having enough time to really develop something fully and getting out there in the market and like being present. Maybe with a more simple version of what you have, but like there really is a pressure to get out there and like be perfect.
It's a fine balance.
Yeah.
I do think in a way we could be adopting more what you see in tech, where you have a V1 and you have a V2, and actually talking about an innovation premium instead of a sustainability premium, because customers are used to, oh, this is a new technology, this might not perform perfectly, I'm an early adopter of something exciting, and they're a little more forgiving if it's not perfect. So I personally feel like we should be shifting the conversation, and that also gets you out of the Green Claims Directive, which is, as we know, is quite confusing. What about you, Victoria? Do you have any comment on the investment side?
I'd probably echo that, and I think we get pushed a lot on costs, and proving when we set up our first factory, which we expect to be about 9 months from our current fundraise, proving that our costs are going to be at least in the ballpark of what we're competing with. So I guess it just goes back to that thing of everyone seems to think of everything in terms of the traditional materials and sort of what Mira was saying before as well. So, but yeah, it is. I think it is a tough period to fundraise for new materials.
Okay. Do you have a comment, Mira? Do you want to talk about?
Yeah,
You had the idea.
Yeah, I was just also going to say that I think this is the time when we need the investment the most. There are a lot of deadlines coming up for like 2030, 2050. If you look at the numbers for raw materials, like we need to lower the emissions for raw materials by I think 45% by 2030. And yet it's estimated to triple by 2050, and these are just like completely different lines. So yeah, we have this idea. Tell your
I love that. I love that beginning.
friends.
We have this idea. It's like, yes, what is it?
So what we want to do is we want to create a portfolio of different biomaterials innovators, and that brands and investors can invest in the whole portfolio. Brands and investors are always worried about like, oh, are we picking the right one? Is this the one that's going to be the unicorn, you know? And by creating a group, then you spread that risk, and you also spread the investment across the innovators. So this is something that that we've been thinking about, and that we're going to continue working on. If it's something that you think sounds interesting, get in touch.
Good.
Yeah, we
Good
think
call to
this
action.
this could
Yeah.
be really great.
Okay. Love it. Great. All right. I'm going to open it up now for questions. Right here? And then there's another one over here. I don't know.
Hello, thank you for opening this conversation. Is there any legislation which spans internationally for a material to be classed as bio-based?
Could you speak up a little? I don't know.
Sorry.
If you can
Yeah.
hear me. Yeah,
we
that's
hear
better.
Is there any
Oh,
sort
there
of
we go.
international legislation for a material to be classified as bio-based, or is it separate in different countries?
International legislation for something to be classified as bio-based or separate per country?
I mean, there are certifications. I don't know if there's worldwide legislation. I think that Europe really leads that kind of thing. And a lot of countries, well, a lot of companies by default follow what the most stringent requirements in the biggest market are. So Europe really has a power because of that. It's like California in the U.S. Like
Yes.
all of the rules change because they're the most stringent.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the closest thing we have is certifications, and those are voluntary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen more. I've seen this happening more in the EU. And I know that a couple of brands that I'm not going to mention, they got slapped a little bit for greenwashing, and weren't allowed to do photos where they show like plants and things next to their products. So I think that there is. I think we're seeing more and more kind of a more stringent approach to this. Yeah, which it's a great question, and obviously it really highlights what all of us do as well. So yeah.
Yeah. And from what I know, no, there's no international standard for that. And even within the US, I'm not sure if this is still valid, but a few years ago, depending on the product category, the percentage of bio-based input that you needed to be able to call it bio-based was quite different. So for carpets, it was like 7%. It was 7% bio-based material. You could market it as bio-based. I'm not sure if this is still the case, but Amy from Biofabricate, I remember her talking about this a while back. Yes.
Hi, Maria. It was really interesting what you were saying about standards there, and that a lot of standards are kind of created around synthetic materials or conventional materials, and it made me think a little bit about like the policy realm and particularly like the EU product environmental footprint. And my question is. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm really interested in microfibers, and the PEF may look to address microfibers in the future, both from natural and synthetic materials. So is incoming policy quite a risk to innovators when these are informed by, again, like you said, conventional materials and based on conventional materials? And how could that be addressed in the future to be more supportive of innovators?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the legislation isn't the danger. I think the danger is general education of people. And like, for example, if you look at the popularity of recycled polyester, like these leggings were made from plastic bottles. If you actually really think about it, the plastic bottles should recycle back into themselves. They shouldn't be taken out of that system and recycled into a legging, which can be washed and then release microplastics. That's not good at all. That's actually awful. And but nobody actually really thinks about it or knows about it. It's just kind of an accepted thing, like, oh, recycled is really good. I think the problem is this is such a complex issue with so many nuanced parts of it, and I think it's really difficult for consumers to be able to tell the difference because they're getting information from here, they're getting information from here, they're getting stuff from brands, and like everybody's telling their own story that highlights what they're doing. But I don't even know where people can turn to get an unbiased view of that. So maybe that's more where we need to look in terms of maybe instead of legislation, more an education that is a little bit more standardized.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
a good point. And they are such complex, nuanced issues. One of the things, again, going back to the report, there's like a roadmap at the end, but we need to be lobbying better. I think fashion, it's been there are different organizations focused on different things, and you have the chemicals industry there with 100 people sitting in Brussels, and they're just like, whoosh, this is what we need. And I would love to get an alliance, of all different groups that care about the topic of next gen and really put forward like this position paper manifesto of like, these are the things that we need, and this is why, because the legislators don't have this depth of knowledge either. And they're looking for input, and I think we could be stronger as an industry in putting the right input forward for them.
How would we do that?
Well, what I recommend is an alliance, really.
Yeah.
So an inclusive alliance taking different parts of the supply chain, so not just brand-led, not just supplier-led, but all the different members that make up the value chain, and coming together and starting, putting together this position paper on the important topics. I mean, we need more subsidies, we need feed-in tariffs, we need, to help buffer the price premium. And then do like more of a grassroots campaign and make sure that we're providing the right tools to businesses, to consumers, like send this letter or whatever that is. But there's a lot that can be done, I think, on a relatively small budget if you're getting the right names and people focused on an issue together. Yeah.
On board.
Yeah.
On board.
Yeah,
okay, great.
sign
So
us
call to
up.
action if you want to be involved. Great. Okay, are there other questions? We have, I think, 3 or 4 minutes left. Come on, guys. There must be a question out there. Really? No, too early? Not enough coffee?
Oh, there we
Yes,
Yeah.
that's okay. You can ask too.
Sorry, I didn't want to take up too much time.
Okay.
Is there any, how would you recommend putting
You got to hold the
pressure-
mic a little closer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So how would you recommend putting pressure on our governments to implement systematic change and highlight the need for it?
I don't think, I don't think we need to focus on systematic change all the time. I think we need to focus on also what are the things that they can do now. And that's like going back to what I said, like these are things that we need in the legislation. We've seen this in electric vehicles. We've seen this in solar. Can you help us do this? And it's, I don't know what you mean by systematic change exactly, but anyway, that's my own bias.
Well,
Who
can
would
there
like to
be
go?
a tree lobby, like, the oil companies, maybe
Yeah.
the tree growers or the paper
There
companies?
is a Christmas tree industry association.
Yeah, so
It already exists.
Yeah, to add to your question, just as an example of how maybe it's not working. So I know with packaging, for example, packaging for us. This is another biomaterials innovator that I know. With packaging, the margins are so tight, of course, and there's just so little maneuverability. And if you're just a little over what currently exists, it's like not even considered. And so their packaging was 2p more expensive than the existing one, I think after the plastic tax. And that's 2p too much,
Yeah.
And so to really implement, this type of change, this type of holistic change, I think that the issue, and that's what you were touching on as well, Christine, I think the issue really needs to be fully understood, so that you then get to a price point where they're either completely even or you're subsidizing basically the biomaterials, like plastic has been subsidized to make it more competitive against the plastic options.
Yeah.
the plastics industry is also, fighting tooth and nail with various loopholes in classifying biomaterials as, for example, sometimes single-use products, and then they basically then get classed as plastics, which is a little insane-making if you think about it.
And they're beginning to feel in packaging with EPR, extended producer responsibility. The big fast-moving consumer group, on their packaging now on their P&L, they're seeing a 6% increase in costs because of EPR if they're not using the right things. So that's going to start kicking in, and at least on that side, I think the penalties are still a bit too low in what they're proposing in apparel, but that kind of thing will kick in and hopefully make a difference as well. I'm afraid we're out of time already. So let's give a round of applause to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. Thanks. And everybody here you can come and meet them. They have booths, they have their materials ready, so we can continue the conversation that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks.